Yes, so very happy to be speaking to Tony Warriner, the co-founder, of course, of Revolution Software. Obviously, if you're an adventure game fan, that probably doesn't need much of an introduction. It's made classics like Broken Sword. We're going to be focusing a bit today on Beneath a Steel Sky, which is it's 30 years this year since it was made. Not to make you feel old or anything, Tony, but thank you so much for joining. You know, you've made so many classic adventure games, and it's really a pleasure to be able to chat to you.
Thank you.
And I was talking just before we started this about the book. I will show it again. Thank you so much for getting me a copy of this.
Uh-huh.
Tony's book, which kind of marks sort of how Revolution Software was made, and all the kind of history behind all of that. Um, I was interested, Tony. You know, in your book, you mentioned how Beneath a Steel Sky is your favorite game.
Mm.
So interested as to why that is.
Uh, it's a good question. I mean, it is my favorite, and I think of it very fondly now.
I mean,
I mean,
I'm not, I understand why, because it's a great game. Obviously, I'm not like, why that game?
yeah, why?
Yeah, why? No,
Um,
it's brilliant. It's a good game.
I mean, it's quite a nice size as well. You know, it's the whole thing. It's kind of sits nicely, and it's well proportioned and all that kind of thing, and it looks good. I don't know. I mean, in the end, everything came together on it, and it might not have done because it was quite a difficult. I mean, at the time, it was the hardest thing I've ever worked on. I mean, that's the reason why you might hate it the most, or I mean, it's flipped the other way, and thankfully it turned out all right, and it's the one that I like the most, which is lucky because it was painful to write, but it was a very intense time. It was also how I've come to think that these games should be written, in a very a tight small group, swirling through the drama and the chaos to produce something that turns out really cool, and people don't do it that way anymore, which is a shame. I mean, some people do, but the triple A's and all those things, they're all plotted out on spreadsheets and stuff, and properly supposedly scheduled, and all the things we didn't do. But somehow through all that chaos came hopefully a classic game, and part of the reason for writing the book was to try and understand that process again, and how we did it, with the hope of maybe reproducing it again in future. Because I think a lot of that way of working is discouraged now,
Mm.
and I don't think it should be necessarily. I mean, no one at business school will tell you to run business like we did, but that at the end of the day, it was a creative work, and how are you going to produce that? You can't sort of polish the whole thing up to the point where you lose the creativity. So you've got that kind of financial side and
Yeah.
creative side all pulling at each other, and somehow we got through it, and the results were worth it. So you know, uh, that's the thing about Steel Sky, I suppose. Its inception was really quite difficult.
And I guess for those who maybe don't know about that, well, why it was difficult, why was it difficult? What was the difficulty in it?
Well, it was hugely underfunded. I
Mm.
mean, there was very little money there. People spend more money than that on just their social media campaigns these days for
Yeah.
big games. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was done on a shoestring. A very small team that just by luck happened to have people that were at the top of their game, really, in a way, in terms of design and graphics, and I mean, we just about got away with the programming, and we were all slightly out of our depth, and had to dig very deep, and it nearly didn't get finished, for financial reasons and for technical reasons, and all the rest of it. Um, so yeah, it was just right on the edge, slightly too far. It was really very pulled very thin, the whole thing. It was lucky to get through it, really.
How did it feel? Because obviously it wasn't the first game that you'd made with the kind of with Revolution, or I think it was called. Well, at what point did it get called Revolution? Because it was Turnvale or something like that before
Well,
that.
it was never really. I mean, the company we bought in those days you used to buy limited companies off the
Yeah.
shelf. So we bought one randomly, and it was called Turnvale. So and we spent ages then trying to think of a company name. It was going to be Jagged Software for a long time. It was very nearly Jagged Software.
Where did that
Uh,
come from? Was that your idea or whose idea? Can you
that
remember?
was, I think Jagged was Charles. Yeah, I think that was one of his. That kind of floated around for a while, and there was a few other ones, and naming things is very difficult.
Yeah.
Uh, and eventually Revolution popped up, and that had the inspiration for that, I think, came from the imagery in that film Excalibur, which Charles and I used to sit and watch over and over. It's where the knights on the hill and the moon thing, or the sun, whatever it is,
Which is a
in the
bit like
background.
the logo, I guess, as well. Yeah.
The logo, yeah. I mean, the logo comes from that film. There's the
Yeah.
exact scene right in the middle of that film, Excalibur. So, and I imagine Revolution was kind of it kind of was born from that imagery. And when we renamed the company, and that's what it was. That's what it was called. And Turnvale we put into Blue the Temptress, of course.
Yes. Yeah. So sorry, but that was a kind of side question that came as I was about to ask a question. But I was going to say, it wasn't the first game you'd maybe made with Charles and some of that team. But what was was there quite a big difference between Lure of the Temptress and then stepping up to Beneath the Steel Sky?
Oddly, yes. I mean, I guess Lure was a lot smaller.
Mm.
It didn't seem as difficult somehow. It sort of dragged on, and we had even less budget on Lure, and we had no budget on Lure Attempts at all until nearer the end. It didn't seem as difficult. It didn't seem as pull. I don't remember it's been quite as bad. It kind of dragged on a bit, and it was difficult, but it didn't look like it was getting out of hand at any point. Didn't Lure the Temptress. Steel Sky, I think we kind of bit off slightly more than we could chew in the size of the thing, and we were looking at kind of running out of money all the time, and then seeing how much game there was still to write, and it didn't really add up, So there was a certain amount of drama going on because of all that kind of thing, But so what? That's what you had to go through if you wanted to write a game.
Yeah. I mean, what was that like as someone, as the kind of one of the designers and programmers of that? Because were you ever feeling like you had to give up some of the things that you wanted to be in?
I don't know. I don't think we did. I mean, I think it all went in. There was nothing. We weren't like sort of chopping it back and saying, "Oh well, we should take out the last section," or whatever. But then again, we didn't really design it exactly up front anyway.
No, I guess not. Okay, yeah.
That was. It's not like we had the whole design down on paper and then it was like, oh well, we better chop out this section of it because that section of it wasn't really known about. We were kind of like, the design was like a couple of weeks ahead of the implementation of the game, so it just kind of rolled forward, and it was like, I talk about it in the book quite a lot. The fog, and the fog would be like 2 weeks ahead, and behind the fog would be some sort of design and little bits of design would like come out of the fog to be made into game, but you never knew how much more there was until it was finished. So, Noreen Kamodi, who was kind of running the finances, she was always very stressed because we couldn't ever really tell her when it was going to finish. That was the way we did it.
To be fair, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen Double Fine's documentary, Psych Odyssey, where they talk about running their kind of company joint making Psychonauts, and it feels like there's always that tension really between the finance person and the creatives and the designers.
Yeah. To some degree, there always will be, because I mean, the problem with video games is you can't really schedule them accurately, because you can only imagine so much. I mean, and you can say, well, there's this location and there's that location and these things happen, and you can sort of say, well, we know that we'll need these animations, and you can plot all that down, and it looks good. But as soon as you start to actually try and make the game, then people realize there's other things that are needed, and then someone comes in, and then eventually you say, oh, okay, this room is finished, this location's done. Someone comes in and tests it, and they play it completely the wrong way,
Yeah.
and it breaks because they're trying to do things that weren't in the design, and everyone goes, oh yeah, you could do that, and then, well, we better have an animation for that, and we better have a sound effect for that, and we need a bit of dialogue for when you try and do this and it doesn't work, and all these things roll up together and put about 100% onto the workload. That's just the way it is. I mean, that's why games are always late. They're always overrun. I mean, they still do.
Yeah.
And the big AAAs from the people that supposedly should know better because they're doing it all professionally. They all overrun as well, just the same way. Except it costs them hundreds of millions of dollars instead of tens of thousands like it cost us.
Talk through a little bit about your virtual theatre concept and how you implemented that in Beneath a Steel Sky, because obviously that was in Lure, but I feel like it really properly came to life in Beneath a Steel Sky.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came from us playing. When we first got together, myself, Charles, and Dave Sykes. We went off up to Wales and talked about what we might want to do. And when Charles brought a PC along, a great big tower thing in his car, from which he'd lifted from Activision, and on that machine was a Leisure Suit Larry game, which we sat and played over the weekend. And we kind of looked at it and said, what can you do to push this stuff on and do something different, And the idea was to run the characters off the screen as well as on the screen. So, they walked off and did things and then walked back on again. And, we kind of thought, wow, yeah, there'll be loads of gameplay from this, which wasn't strictly true. And that was the problem with it. I mean, we probably used it more in Lure because, Lure, it was a bit like the old Gargoyle games on the 8-bit platforms where the city would be running and the people would be walking around, and it was more like that. And in that sense, it was more true to the vision that we had of the whole world running off the stage, as it were.
Yeah.
The failing with it was that when the characters are off screen, you can't see them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Are they actually doing the stuff that you're told that they're doing?
Because the concept is, I guess, for people who aren't aware of it, it's just that it's as to create this kind of living, breathing world of the characters aren't just stuck to the floor; they're doing their own things. But like you say, if you can't see them, then
yeah. I mean, the funny thing was that they were actually doing this stuff, and in Lure, they really were walking around the town in real time, taking the right amount of steps and plotting the way across the screens and opening doors. They really were doing it, but we could have faked the whole thing just as easily and pretended, and it would have been a lot easier. And there's certain things you could do. Looking through windows is quite good, and sending Joey into a room to weld something when you can't get in there because it's radioactive. That kind of thing works well. But we were kind of struggling really to think how to use it. I mean, we were still nobody was consciously thinking this doesn't work. We can't use it anymore in Steel Sky. But it was kind of in the back of our minds. It was kind of, maybe this is a little bit difficult to design for, and then of course later on with Broken Sword, it was like time to let it go.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to have seen it in Broken Sword. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what would have happened? Nico would have walked off the screen and done things, but then it kind of feels like that's happening anyway.
Yeah.
Because in the story, Nico says,
true.
"Well, I'm going off." She says, "I'm going off to my apartment to ring these people and investigate this and research this," and you kind of believe it, because it's coherent. And when she comes back, she says, "Oh yeah, I've done this," and you ring her up and she says, "Oh yeah, I found this. Come on over and let's talk about it." I mean, it's believable,
Yeah.
but it's in a sort of filmic narrative way. So rather than a technical way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, which I haven't thought of it in that way, but yeah, you're right. Actually, it's just in a different kind of script of it. I mean,
and it
one
works
thing,
better that way.
yeah, and I think I'm sure for you, it was a lot of work, kind of implementing all of that. But I do think it certainly, I think it worked with Joey is the thing in Beneath the Steel Sky because of him being this robot, and you talk about a little bit
Yeah,
about it in the book, and he has to go off and do tasks. So I think for that specific character,
yeah,
it worked pretty well. I think.
yeah. For a robot, it works because the interface was necessarily that kind of thing anyway. Go here, do this, and then come back. You don't talk to humans like that. But you could well imagine talking to a robot like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what I guess, and I guess the whole Joey thing was born of virtual theatre. So they were hand in hand, and without virtual theatre, Beneath Steel Sky would actually have been a very different design. So yeah, I mean, it's a good point.
One thing I also love about Beneath the Steel Sky is the accents and the kind of northernness of it and the regionality of it. I'm interested. Was that idea to include that sort of side of it? Because it's not really something you see in sci-fi games. I'll be honest. It's often American and that kind of sort of accent and country. But I didn't know if that was always a decision, or did you? I don't know where that idea came from. I know obviously you're making a game in Hull, you're making a game in the north, so I don't know if it was just simply that you're like, well, let's just do it this way, or where it came from.
Well, there were a lot of coincidences, I suppose. I mean, some of the characters they just got acted out, but I mean, it was recorded in London, next to the bus stop somewhere
Not
in
lit.
Steel.
I'm hoping in an actual studio, not not like.
Well, it was more of a back room. It was more of a back room, I think, because they had to redo it, and because there was like bus noises going past and stuff. It wasn't a good studio, and I think the publisher eventually did re-record it. So, but yeah, I mean, most of the actors would have been from down that way. It's not like we like bus loads of actors from Hull going down to London, you know. So I think they just said. I think what it was actually there was not many actors, so you kind of go right now you're doing this character, so you need to do a different act. It needs to be different. So they'll switch to a different northern accent that's like the extremes of accents to kind of differentiate, and so you can't tell it's the same person reading all the lines. I think that's where a lot of it came from. But then there was a, and I can't quite remember the origin of it, but the local newspaper came to talk to us, and they sort of cottoned onto this idea that we'd mentioned that we'd had to change the text because the Americans at Virgin Interactive couldn't understand some of the terminology, spanner and wrench, that kind of thing. That was the classic one, spanner. They didn't know what a spanner was in Los Angeles, and we had to. So we had to do. We actually had an American language. We actually classed American as a different language, which you probably couldn't. You probably couldn't do it these days and get away with it. But we thought it'd be funny to class American as a different language, and so things like spanner and wrench and all that kind of stuff. And the local newspaper wrote about this because they thought it was hilarious, and it went kind of viral from regional newspapers to main newspapers, and it ended up on Radio 1 Newsbeat as the funny thing at the end,
Yeah,
the funny
yeah.
story at the end of the news. It was the northern accents that Americans can't understand in this video
Oh,
game,
I can
and
imagine them loving that. Yeah.
yeah, it was like something a story going viral in how it used to do it in the 90s, and you can't make that kind of thing happen. You can't engineer it. It's very difficult. Because we tried later on, we tried to invent things that would do this,
Oh,
go the
really?
same way.
Like what?
We couldn't do it. It just happened, and I mean the guy at the Hull Daily Mail, the newspaper, he was obviously very clever because he kind of made it. He kind of did make it happen. But when we tried to re-engineer that kind of situation, we couldn't do it.
That's always the way. It's never when you plan it.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Yeah, yeah. But as to the northernness, yeah, I mean, there weren't actually that many northerns there. I mean, there was myself was the only true. I mean, I was a true Yorkshire person. There was Steve Oates who was from Hull. Um, Another guy, one of the artists, Adam Tween, he was from Newcastle. So like three of us were properly northern. And then, obviously Charles isn't northern.
No.
Dave isn't. Lauren's Irish. Dave Cummins, the writer, he was from Somerset or somewhere. So it wasn't like a really northern thing.
And yeah, because I know obviously you say the actors, but I'm guessing because I feel like the way it was written and the script felt quite I don't know, definitely not kind of like an American take on things. It had like I mean, like you said, a bit of that slang really. That
Yeah.
maybe British slang, which I just just playing it for the first time, just thought it was so refreshing to have kind of like that Britishness in there.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, we didn't overthink it. We
Yeah,
just we just put it in. We just did what we thought was funny and left it. I mean, I've worked on games later where you have that stuff in, but it gets classed as placeholder and smoothed out later down. You can't make these kind of jokes. You can't say this. It's a bit rough around the edges. It's a bit too edgy. In this day and age, you have to be careful what you say, and stuff gets normalized.
yeah.
But we just left it in because we thought it was funny.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's one of my favorite bits of the games, really, just because it's just so different. I mean, in terms of like the sort of sci-fi element of it, that's obviously was quite a bit of a leap from lore as well. Was there a reason you kind of went off in that tangent?
Well, we always had this theory that you'd write a fantasy game and then you'd be bored of that, so you'd go the other way and do sci-fi and
Yeah,
then swap back. I mean, we
which is
did that
what
in
they.
fact.
To be fair, like you say in the book, quite a lot of companies did. Really, it's like those two.
Yeah, yeah. It's just, I mean, that's video games. They tend to be one or the other, don't they? They're dragons and stuff, or they're future dystopian cities. Because I guess it's the history of the industry is like people were into programmers and stuff. They were all into Lord of the Rings and they were all into Blade Runner. I mean, it's basically Lord of the Rings and Blade Runner, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it basically is the video games industry.
Let's just sum it down.
Yeah, it's basically those two things, and that's it. And then it's just variations spinning out from that. I mean, that's not true, but he probably was. He probably was in the 80s.
What was it like working with Dave Gibbons, the graphical artist? Because he was obviously, I know he was working quite a lot with Charles on creating the look of the game. Did you also have to work with him quite a bit back and forth with what you were working on?
I didn't so much. I mean, obviously, I was deep in the coding by the point we were talking to Dave and implementing and stuff like that. I mean, myself and Dave Cummins went to Wales and wrote the initial game design, but then I kind of stepped away from that into the programming. But I do remember Dave. Dave used to come up on the train. He used to come up quite a lot. You'd see him a fair bit, and he took it very seriously because the comic industry was quite difficult. I think back in those days, like it probably still is. And they had this idea that video games might be a really big thing, and they were. I mean, Dave was even then. I mean, he was quite well known in the comic world, but he was looking at games as something that might be, much bigger, and wanted to just kind of get a handle on it, really. So, I mean, he took it very seriously, and we'd see him quite a lot, despite the agony of the journey up. The Hull, which was not particularly pleasant in those days. It's a bit better these days on the train. It wasn't good. It wasn't good in the 90s. But he did it quite often, and you'd see him in Hull, and he would be looking at the game very serious and took it very seriously, and the artwork that he did was iconic, to be honest. I mean, everything about it that he did. I mean, he really modelled the look of it, which is a big part, from the logo. Which is iconic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To those screens, I mean, the opening screens are just fantastic, and all of that was Dave. So, and the concepts for the characters, he did Foster and he did Joey and those things. and it was good stuff. It was very good. I mean, it was on a level that was above what we were capable of otherwise. So we couldn't have matched it. We couldn't have done it ourselves or found someone else easily. So it was just one of those lucky things that he knew Charles from Activision. Where
Yeah.
they talked about doing something, and that relationship carried through into Revolution, and it certainly bore a lot of fruits. I mean, he takes a big credit for that.
You mentioned in the book as well that Robert Foster, the protagonist, was originally called Paisley Foster.
Yeah,
Where did that come from? I can't remember if it's mentioned why it was going to be Paisley.
I think when I was writing the design, I was like on the pen to paper, and I was like, he's got to be called something. I think I just wrote Paisley. I just like
It's a
I
natural
was
name.
yeah. Well, Paisley, it's the design, isn't it? Maybe I was into those swirly things. Maybe there was something of that around the place, or something up in Wales. Maybe the curtains were Paisley or something. I don't know. It just like when you're writing something, there's got to be a name.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Maybe it's going to be Fred, or it's going to be Paisley. I think it's just like one of those things. I think I just wrote it in, and it stood for quite a while actually. I think.
And at what point did it suddenly become Robert? Do you know?
Well, it probably that probably is an occasion where it got smoothed out by Dave and Charles would have smoothed that out somewhere when they were thinking about it.
Finn in the chat makes a good point, saying, "I realised I completely missed the voiceovers because we got the game on floppy disks."
Right.
Yeah, which is obviously that's kind of part of it as well. With Beneath the Steel Sky, because it wasn't originally going to be voiced at all, was it? And then you got some extra money in to do that.
Well, it wasn't normal to
Yeah.
voice things in those days. I mean, I think, and I'm probably wrong, but we were thinking and saying that Steel Sky was the first big, fully voiced adventure game, certainly, and that came because of the CD32, where they'd literally paid for that recording, to make a special version for the CD32. I mean, that's where that came from. It was a big chunk of money that's to make something fill a CD,
Yeah.
And show off that machine. So that's where that budget came from. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been.
And was that? I suppose that wasn't too much extra work for you guys, though. It was more just having the actors record all of that, or was it?
Well, it's always. I mean, it was difficult because you have to. I mean, the problem with voice recording is that the script has got to be done. So your game has got to be locked down, and nothing's going to be added, and all that kind of thing, which was obviously difficult for us to get to that stage. And they always want to do it. You have to book things in advance, and that doesn't really fit with writing video games. Because you don't know.
As
you
you've
don't
said.
know anything. You don't know anything beyond about 3 days. So if someone says in 6 weeks' time we're booking a studio and these actors and they're all going to be there, you're in a bit of trouble really if you've not got a final script. So in that sense, it was difficult. Other than that, and as I say, I think they screwed it all up and it was done with the bus noises and they had to do it again, and so it wasn't a smooth process. But then they posted them all back, and I think. They probably, there was probably a lot of confusion as to how those files should be, because these days you get files back and they're all been chopped and cleaned up and they've got the right file name that matches the text line. There are processes now for doing that kind of thing properly. I imagine the studio that dealt with those recordings had never done a video game type thing before, so the notion of having all these thousands of lines and they all need to be chopped up properly and given some sort of identifiable name would have been quite alien.
Yeah.
So it probably wasn't, I don't remember it going wrong as such, but it probably wasn't easy for anybody involved because no one had done anything quite like that before.
And Finn also makes the point, which kind of I found was interesting to learn about in the book, where Finn says it had music and SFX, but it came on 15 floppy disks. Now, one of those floppy disks doesn't actually exist. Is that right? Or there was a number you had to change or something?
Well, it sort of does. It sort of does exist, but there's a gap in the naming.
Yeah.
So we actually, I mean, there should have been something like there should have been. I don't know. I can't remember how it works now. There should have been an extra disc, but we just missed disc 11, I think it was, and we never put any files on disc 11. So we basically disc 12. The 12, what we thought was disc 12, we where it would say 12, insert disc 12 on the screen, we had to change it so it said 11 because there wasn't a disc 11.
Oh, right.
Because we just forgot to, and it was so inflexible was the way we developed it that we couldn't just jig it all around internally. So it stayed on disc 12, and we just renamed, disc 12 had 11 written on it, and I mean, you couldn't tell the difference, but I mean, I think people have looked in the source. People have looked in. If you look a bit further, a bit deeper, you can tell that there's a disc missing.
Which again, I guess, as you say, with these kind of things, you probably wouldn't get that kind of thing now, but it's sort of part of the charm of it all at the time, really.
Yeah, well, it's part of the general chaos and lack of professionalism, I suppose.
Well, I mean, because it's something I was wondering. Obviously, that there was a sequel to Beneath quite, a long time after. I know you weren't really as involved with that directly, but with Beneath specifically, I know you've mentioned you've had very sort of limited resources to make this game. Would you ever want to see it remastered in any way? And if so, what would you change about it?
It would be a hell of a job.
Yeah.
It would be a hell of a job because and the engine is kind of inflexible. Then again, we did the iOS one, and that we worked with those source code, the source code that ScumVM produced from our original assembly language. So I mean, it could be done. There's a lot of hard numbers hidden away in binary that are not very accessible. That's the main problem with it. So I mean, when you play the iOS version of Beneath Steel Sky, you're effectively running an emulator.
Right.
It's
Okay.
like it's like a new engine that looks into the data of the original game and just interprets it. I mean, it plays exactly the same, but it's a different engine, but the same data. So if you ever tried to change that data, like if the screen got bigger, the coordinates of everything moved. It's like where do you do that? Where do you handle that move? Because the data would be so you can't rebuild the data. It's like a ROM. Yeah. So
Right.
everything's
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it could be done. Yeah. I mean, it could be done, and it would be easier than Broken Sword because it's smaller in that respect. Yeah. I mean, is there a call for? If there was a call for it, then I think the thing about Broken Sword is it's still getting bigger. I think more people are playing it now than there were 10 years ago, and more people are talking about it than there were, because it's kind of there's something about it that's made it live a lot longer and get more popular. I think it's the sort of coziness of the George and Nico thing, and I think Broken Sword has got something different about it than Steel Sky, which is kind of a well-loved, kind of cultish. I mean, a lot of people really like it, but it's not mass. There's not. If you go on Facebook, you won't find loads of Steel Sky groups talking about it all the time. I mean, it's great to be talking about it now as part of the 30 thing, but it's not. It's not as well known. So, is there a commercial?
I suppose even if there was, is there any parts you'd want to rejig or change, or would there be much is
Well, I think
part
you
of its
wouldn't.
charm the way it is? I don't know.
It kind of is. I mean, I wouldn't want to change the game as such.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be nice to see it with slightly better graphics. I suppose you could up-res it a bit and make it look a bit nicer. I don't think you could mess with the gameplay particularly,
Yeah.
or you would want to. It's pretty good as it is in a way. The music's pretty funny, but then again, you can't really imagine it without the music either. So, don't know really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we did on iOS, what did we do? We added hints because it was a really difficult game to play. when we went back to it to do the iOS version, no one had played it for like 15 years, and we couldn't figure out how to play it.
Oh,
We were
really?
like, we were going, this is hard. When we were looking at,
You
we were
made
getting
it.
walk. Yeah, well, a fair few years had passed,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we were on the internet reading walkthroughs and
yeah.
going, oh yeah, that's what we did. That's what we did. I mean, it's quite difficult. So I mean, I guess you would keep the hint system in there to keep people moving, because people don't have much patience as much patience as they
Yeah.
did back in the day. I mean, it is a hard game. I think it's not illogical, but it's quite difficult. There's nothing silly in it, but it's still they're just difficult puzzles. From that, as they were in that era. But you couldn't really change. It'd be a different game, wouldn't it, if you changed it? That's the thing. So no, I wouldn't mess with it too much. I mean, I don't think there ever will be a remastered, but you never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
What were your thoughts on Beyond Steel Sky then? How did you feel about that?
Well, in theory, it was a good idea because
Mm.
certainly Steve Ince and myself spent decades trying to get interest from everyone
Yeah.
to. I mean, the thing about it was we owned the IP, which was quite rare. I mean, a lot of developers would lose. You just by default lose your IP, and then you've got nothing, and it's not yours to do a sequel. But I mean, we always owned Beneath Steel Sky, so it was always an option for us to do whatever we wanted with it. And Steve and I would quite often write a proposal saying, "This is what happened, really." Because it ends on quite a good point, with Joey taking over the city and all that stuff. Or was it Joey or was it Ken? All this kind of stuff was going on. So it's quite easy to project forward and imagine all sorts of scenarios where it just carries on. From the moment that the first one ended. I mean, that's how we saw it. The first one finished, and what happens a minute later. I mean, all sorts could happen, and it could, it's not the end. It just carries on, like a new nightmare unfolds when Joey takes over. So, I mean, that's what we would have done.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of proposals along those lines. So it was disappointing when it finally did come back and turned into Beyond, and I didn't particularly like what was being proposed, and I didn't like the style that was being set for the graphics and this kind of thing. And there was a lot of damage done to people's general well-being after the nightmare that was Broken Sword 5. So, I was quite keen not to ever be in that kind of situation again. And Beyond, to me, looked like it was going to be exactly the same thing as Broken Sword 5 had been, which was slightly more difficulty than it was probably worth. So, I kind of, for various reasons, all sorts of politics and things were all swirling around at the same time, as a sort of outcome from Broken Sword 5 as well. So I worked on the early design, but I didn't like the way it was going. So it was quite easy for me to step aside, which I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, you talking about Broken Sword 5, was that again similar things? Just kind of issues with delays and finances and all these kind of things that come along.
It was a big game.
Yeah.
A big game and not quite enough money to write it. So it was. I mean, that's kind of the story of Revolution, I guess you would say, because it happened with all the games pretty much, apart from BS2. Yeah, I mean, five was quite difficult. Not in a really bad way. It was just a bit too much like hard work for the work for the money to finance it. I mean, people were looking at the Kickstarter and going, "Wow, they've got so much money to do this game," and it was probably 20% of what we actually needed to write it. So, it got us so far, but not all of the way. So we had to do unpleasant things like split the game into two, and
yes, of course, yeah,
all that kind of stuff. So the end result was okay, and we did have fun writing it, and the Kickstarter was good fun, and I particularly liked the process of working just for the fan base. Cut out the publisher and work direct. I mean, that to me was very good, and I enjoyed that side of it. But what we tried to write in the end turned out to be too much for the viable scope of the project. So it did turn quite difficult in many ways.
Yeah, and a good point made in the chat actually about favorite thing about Beneath a Steel Sky being the world setting and the way society is physically vertical. And I guess that does tie in very much with the sort of sci-fi theme, but I think that's quite unusual really in games, or certainly of that time anyway. I don't know if that was something you were sort of
Well, yeah, I mean,
thought
it was
about, or whether
coming.
it just happened
It was
naturally.
coming. I mean, it was the politics at the time, which now seem almost quaint compared to the nightmares that we're enduring now in politics. But I guess it was Thatcherism. There was that kind of a new kind of feeling of something brutal going on in the background that's suppressing people and subverting them and prisoning them in this way or the other. I mean, that's where it came from. It was politics. I mean, I wasn't particularly left wing or right wing at the time, but I mean, there was a lot of politics floating around. I mean, Dave Gibbons was very political, very left wing, and he effectively wrote the script. So a lot of that social comment came from him and his politics, which were very left wing, proper.
Yeah.
And we were kind of, most of us were kind of a bit, not exactly Tory, but we were kind of, we're building a business and
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
doing our own thing, and it was a little bit kind of go for it, which was some of the Thatcherite mantra, which was good fun, really, and that was a reaction to the 70s, of course, which were like rotten and stagnating, and Britain was like not really doing anything, and for a short time, the Thatcherism stuff was. She was like, go for it, everyone, go for it and build something, and that was quite good, that stuff. So you had that kind of that kind of mix in Revolution as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Dave was going, well, where does all this end, and where it ends is the nightmares we have at the moment. So where we're desperately trying to veer back the other way a little bit and gain some normality again. So I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of bad things happening when we were influenced by that, and there were storm clouds on the horizon, as there certainly were, with the benefit of hindsight, and there's all of that is mixed into Steel Sky, certainly.
Tell me a bit about the game that you're working on now, Wormhole Dungeon. Thanks for sending me a little bit of that video about it, because to me it looked like a kind of interesting mix of sort of quite simple platformer and adventure game, which has seemed quite unusual.
Yeah, and whether that's a good thing or not, we'll find out fairly soon, I suppose. I mean, I've gone back to my roots in some ways, which is the old 8-bit genre of arcade adventure, which was something that's kind of gone now, I suppose. It kind of died out in the 80s. I mean, the closest thing now is Metroidvania.
Yeah.
But I'm deliberately not calling it a Metroidvania, because people have very specific and strict understanding of what makes a Metroidvania, and you don't really go in there claiming to be one unless you're doing everything exactly the right way. And I'm certainly not particularly following any genre. I mean, it's not really platformy in that you need any skill to do the platforms. I mean, you move around a 2D world, and you do shoot some things with guns that you find, and then you shoot down some robots and pull them apart, take out the bits from inside them and build a new one, and put your Joey board equivalent in, and off you go and solve some more puzzles and so on, like that. So I mean, it's more Steel Sky than anything, because there's a lot. I mean, Steel Sky was kind of my design in to some extent, and the things I liked in Steel Sky was Joey, and that initial puzzle where you put Joey's board into the shell in the junk pile. I always loved that. I thought that was the best thing ever, and I wanted to do, I wanted to build a whole game around that concept at Revolution, and other people were kind of, well, it was okay, but it wasn't something that you would build a whole thing on, But I always wanted to do that. So this game does do that. you have your robot AI, and there's lots of opportunities to plug it in different places, and hopefully get some actual really really good gameplay and scenarios from that. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of dialogue, and for that kind of game, the way it looks, it probably gives a certain impression, but it's a much more narrative than you would expect from that kind of game. There's a lot of chat and a lot of conversations and a lot of very adventure-y, Still Sky-ish type puzzles, but in a world where you are jumping around and shooting a little bit, but not in a. It's not going to be difficult to play.
Yeah.
You do those things, but it's like not. That's not the challenge. You might have to shoot your way through a hall of robots, but if you've put the right Joey shell together and you've got the right laser gun in there, then you'll win the fight. And you'll go, oh great, we've won the fight. It wasn't too difficult, and now we've moved on a bit. So that's the idea behind that. And I like that look. It's something I can do myself, and no one else really on the programming. I've got a friend that helps me with some tech stuff occasionally. Famous artist Stu Cambridge is doing the graphics, so it's got a very good look, a good 90s look from him, which is looking terrific, and it's so good to see. Because I've been working with my placeholder graphics for so long, and it's just popping into life this last few weeks with Stu's stuff. So that's really exciting. And the way I describe it is that imagine at the point where the Amiga kind of died at the end of what would be early 90s, probably the Amiga started to fade away. Imagine if it hadn't, and there'd been another Amiga and another Amiga. Well, not that at the end of that period of time, when it didn't happen, but if it had a different alternate universe, the PlayStation never appeared. Amiga kept going. That's where this game is based.
And I can totally see that.
You can do that now. You can, because it's great to have infinite processor and infinite RAM and infinite storage and all this kind of stuff. But I like those graphics from that era, so that's what I've gone for.
And is there, if people want to find out more information about this, if you got anything up at the moment, is there any kind of Steam?
Well, I should have, shouldn't I? Virtually nothing at all.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I know you've been tweeting about it, but I was trying to find out more information myself as well. So I was glad you sent me that video, so I could get a good idea. Of it.
Well, you're the only person who's seen it, so
I feel very privileged for that. I mean, thank you for that. We'll just talk about something no one else can see.
Yeah. Imagine this, guys. It's really good. Very soon. See, the thing is, I mean, I have tweeted the odd thing, but not in a serious.
I saw screenshots and stuff.
Yeah, the odd little bit just to see how people react to things. But now it's got real graphics in it. Is the time to do that. So, I mean, literally almost at the top of my to-do list.
Great. Good.
Is Steam page, itch page, screenshots, TikToks, which is the way it's done these days, apparently. TikTok, driving those wish lists is what
Discord
we're told to do.
server, all these things,
Discord server, yeah. I've got that actually, but no one's on it apart from me. But yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, very soon.
Great.
Very
okay.
soon. Yeah. And the plan I think is to do some sort of demo to get feedback. So there'll be I don't know, maybe I'll invite 100 people or something, or maybe that's a bit ambitious, I don't know, 100 people to test it and just give feedback on the Discord, so and tune it some more, and then see. And if everyone hates it, then it was worth a shot. If people like it, then it's worth carrying on, take it to the next stage.
Well, I think I mean there's a lot of people in the chat interested in it, so
cool.
If you need people to test out, I'm sure they'd be up for it.
Well, that's going to be next month. That's
right.
Okay. That's definitely coming real soon.
If people do want to put a quick question in, by the way, because we're going to sort of wrap this up quite shortly. I was interested. I had a chat with Steve Ince, who obviously, as you mentioned, worked for a long time at Revolution as well, and also as a kind of freelance too. He was talking about, as part of the reason he sort of left working in the video game industry was concerns over AI and how that's going to be used. I wonder how you feel about all of that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm very interested in that stuff as to where it's going. I mean, none of it looks particularly enthralling. I think all this generative art stuff is probably a passing phase to some
Yeah.
degree, and I think the actual technology is got a lot. It's going to go into a lot of places beyond just mashing up search engine photo. I mean, you know what it's doing, don't you? I mean, it's finding stuff that's already out there, and there's something very clever rejoining those things together and redrawing them, which I don't think you can use that stuff. I think it's worthless junk. I mean, if you use that stuff to actually represent yourself or your work, then you're effectively saying your stuff is as worthless as the art that you're using. So, I mean, I would never use it. But I think the technology will quickly move past that and into far more problematic areas like, digital assistants that people fall in love with and stop talking to people instead of they're talking to their AIs who are telling them things that are maybe overly influenced by, people that you wouldn't want to be influencing people via, if your AI is telling you to do this or do that, who's telling the AI? Where's it getting its information from? You can easily see how. I mean, look at Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how much you can trust.
Point in case.
the big tech bros. Yeah, when those guys start running the software behind personal assistants that are advising you on a daily basis, then heaven help us all. And I don't think legislation will keep up with it. So yeah, it's going to be very problematic, but it'll be way above the problems we see at the moment with generative art. So I mean, it's interesting because Revolution. We're always interested in AI and thinking about that kind. I mean, that's what Steel Sky is really. It's a lot of AI type speculation as to how it will go in that game. I mean, that was 30 years ago. And some of that stuff now is coming to pass. So it's of its day, I suppose.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. Crunchy Fried Games asks, do you have a system for dialogue that doesn't involve drowning in notebooks and Word/Excel docs?
The dialogue. I mean, the games were written using a scripting system, and what we called script was effectively an interpreted language. I mean, I think all games use them anyway. I mean, we had one. We called it script, and it's an interpreted language, and all the scenes would be written in script. So it would say if the door is locked, then George says the door's locked, and if otherwise, play the open door animation. It's like that, and it's different from the engine. The engine doesn't, the engine doesn't know about content. It just does what it's told, and the scripts were where the content was, and they're basically a simple programming language, and the speech lines would be in that script, so they would be in the place where they were used in the game. They weren't separate from it, but we would have a process external to the game scripts which would scan them all, pull the lines out, and put them into a file with an ID number, and that could then be recorded or whatever, and that number would come back on the file name, and it would go alongside the game. So yeah, I mean, there weren't, in terms of actually writing the game, we weren't dealing with spreadsheets or text files or anything like that. We just edited our script files, of which there are some examples in the book. I suppose I probably put them in, to show how it worked. I mean, we thought we were geniuses and we'd come up with something amazingly new. And when we did come up with that idea ourselves, but every other game uses the same sort of thing. So, I mean,
This all happened to it.
There must have been a time when everyone solved the same problem in the same way, because that's what you do. And my new game does exactly the same thing. I mean, little scenes, hanging on events. If you hit something with a spanner, it'll try and run a scene for you hitting that thing with the spanner, and if the scene exists, then it plays it, and maybe you get a little line of dialogue or an animation. And if it's not interesting enough for anything to happen, then it will just fall back and default to shrugging his shoulders or something. It's the way we did adventures, and you can get quite a lot of value from it in a slightly different game like Wormhole. So I still do things that way.
No, I think that does make sense, and probably a bit tidier, probably, I imagine, than I don't know, in a sense.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you just look at the scenes in, and if you look if you've got the book there, if you look on the back page, the back cover, you'll see a Dwayne scene at the top.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it was done. But you need that. Yeah, you need that. You need to see the dialogue where it is corresponding to the logic. So that's the only place to put it.
Right, we're shortly wrapping this up. I was just going to ask. I'd be interested. It's a bit of a broad question, but just because you talk so much about when you're working in the industry, weathering so many different storms and issues, and obviously things feeling quite unpredictable now for a lot of small companies as well. What kind of advice would you give to people working in this industry at the moment?
Yeah, my advice is not always the same as other people's.
And it's a fair advice to say don't work in the industry, because a few people have said that.
Well, I mean, making games is good. I mean, the beauty of it is you can make your own game these days. And
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, it was still quite difficult to. You could make the game, but you couldn't distribute it. So you would end up with a publisher who would make the CDs or make the cassettes, and a truckload of them would go to a distribution center, and the distribution center would take them to the shops. And you had to have a salesperson who would go and see W.H. Smith's and persuade them that the game was worth buying because it was getting good reviews in Crash Magazine. There was that whole side to it, which took a lot of organization, and it was kind of businessy. The beauty now is that you can still make your own game, because AAA is one thing, but you can write a very small game, and if it's charming and fun and stuff like that, and people like it, then it could do very well.
Yeah.
But you need to promote it, so you have to do the TikToks and all that stuff. But it's a small price to pay, I think. And some people don't like doing it, and they just want a sort of black box with publisher written on it, and where magic happens and the game sells if it goes via that route. And maybe I will do that with Wormhole. I don't know, but I'm prepared to do the whole thing myself if I have to. What's my advice? Well, maybe be careful with education. Don't necessarily run up massive university debts learning how to write video games, because what they're teaching you is almost certainly not the right thing. Ideally, if you're starting off, go and work for a developer, but assume that you're not going to like it in the long term. Or if it's a biggish company, you will almost certainly be kicked out when a game doesn't get the right Metacritic score, or a bigger company buys it and shuts it down, or these jobs never last very long in the games industry. So you're doing them not to earn money particularly, but to learn how to do things, learn how not to do things, make some contacts, see some things, and then you're in an ideal place. If you really want to write games, form a small team and do it like music. There should be ideally 5-6 people making a game, and you can do that these days. And if it's going to be bigger than that, then you start layering in management, and it becomes a slightly different thing. Maybe some people would like that. I've seen too much of it, and I prefer the small team that kind of everybody's skills interlinks and produces something greater than any of them could do on their own. That's the beauty. When you get like a small team and everyone works in this kind of, what's the word? Symbiotic, is that the word? No, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. When the parts are greater than the
the
whole is greater than the parts. that sometimes happens, as it does with bands. I mean, treat it like making games. It should be like being in a band, you know.
I like that. I like that analogy.
Super creative, but that's not what the industry is about. It's not what you're prepared for at university, and it's not what if you go work for Ubisoft in Montreal, that's not what you're going to see at all. So I mean, be aware of all that. But I come from the old school, but then again, I've written some games that people still like, so there's a grain of truth in what I say.
Are there any sort of adventure games from more recent times that you've enjoyed playing?
I played Hobbs Barrow, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, that's great.
Nice and small. Obviously done not on a vast budget, but it's got the charm, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's greater than some of its parts again, because it's just everything it does really well. And that's the model, really. If you're going to write an adventure game now, probably that's the game to look at, to see how to shape it, and what your ambition, what you can do with a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money. I mean, Hobbs Barrow is a perfect example of what to look at.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. It's a great game.
And it moves along at a good pace,
Yeah.
I played a few other games. I mean, I don't play huge amounts of adventures because I look at all sorts of things. I play them occasionally, and a lot of them, you play for an hour or so and you've not really achieved much.
Yeah.
which is a really obvious mistake to make, and that seems to occur a lot. You need to start small and get people moving really quickly. A lot of games seem to miss that, big ones and small ones. So that's why Lure of the Temptress, it starts in one room where you're locked in, and the only puzzle is to get out. So it's the scope of what you're going to do is quite clear. You're not confused about what your aim is. It must be to escape, and the solution is not too far away. And then you're in 3 rooms, and it's slightly more complicated, and you escape from the 3 rooms into the bigger area again. And that's probably not a bad structure to go for if you're writing an adventure game.
A final question that we like to just kind of throw in and ask quite randomly, Tony, what's your favourite chocolate bar?
You know what? There was one, and I'm actually quite upset about this. There was one at Tesco's. It was like, it had like nuggety bits in, and it was their own branded thing. I mean, it didn't say Tesco Great Chocolate on it. It was like, it was something like the knife or something. It was like, I'm sure the word knife was in the, and I only went from the look of it. And I used to go into Tesco, big Tesco, not the small ones.
Right,
you had to go to big Tesco, and I'd buy like 10 of them. Okay. And this went on for like the last 6 months or so, and this is really nice chocolate. It's not too sweet, it's not too dark, it's just right. And now it's gone. They've killed it.
How
upsetting. So I'm devastated. I can't find anything else to move on to.
Oh well, we'll have to start a campaign, Tony, to get that re-enlisted or find out what happened to it. You're not sure, and you think it's called what?
I'm sure it had the word knife in the name of it somehow.
Maybe that's why it got stopped.
It was really good stuff.
I'm sorry.
It's interesting you asked me about this, because this is a big thing with me at the moment. This chocolate bar.
So it's quite recent that it got stopped.
Oh yeah. I've only just run out.
Oh gosh.
I mean, it's possible. The next time I go to big Tesco,
right,
the supply line problem has been fixed, and there's going to be acres of these things, and I'm going to buy like 3 boxes of them.
Right. Well, guys, keep an eye out for that. Please, Tony, keep us updated on that. We need to know.
If I find them, I'm going to tweet it for. Well, I should keep it quiet, really, shouldn't I?
But yeah.
I'll DM you with a picture.
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
I will.
Tony, thanks so much for having a chat with us. It's been really great to just hear about your thoughts on Beneath and everything. I'm really looking forward to Wormhole Dungeon. Get those pages out there so I can share the links.
I will. But you know what it's like,
No,
I can work on the game, or I can work on the web page, it's like
Yeah, I think
Well,
that's
maybe, yeah.
fair.
But yeah,
And when you're in a smaller team as well, obviously that's kind of the push and pull of it, isn't it?
it's coming real soon, real soon.
Great. Looking forward to it. And thank you so much, Tony. And yeah, speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.